I showed up to my wife's lavish birthday party that I paid for, only to see everyone laughing and walking out of the venue. Mr. Always showing up late. Then my wife and her office lover walked out holding hands. Oh, you didn't get my text? You were not invited. So I walked away, quietly canceled every payment, party, trip, and pulled out my 90% company share $157 million worth. Minutes later, my phone lit up with 156 missed calls, and someone showed up at my door. You know that feeling when you're about to walk into what you think is going to be the highlight of your evening, only to discover you're actually the punchline of someone else's joke? Yeah, well, welcome to my Tuesday night in downtown Manhattan, where I learned that apparently being fashionably late to your own wife's birthday party isn't fashionable at all. It's just pathetic. I pulled up to the Meridian Ballroom in my Tesla, the kind of place that makes your wallet cry just from the valet parking fees. Crystal chandeliers hanging like expensive tears from a 20-foot ceiling, marble floors so polished you could probably perform surgery on them, and doormen who looked like they moonlighted as Secret Service agents. This wasn't just any venue. This was the venue, the kind of place where Manhattan's elite came to pretend they were royalty for a few hours. And guess who dropped a cool 50 grand to rent it out for the night? That's right, yours truly, the guy who was apparently about to become the evening's entertainment. I'd been stuck in that godforsaken conference room until 9:30, listening to a bunch of Japanese investors drone on about quarterly projections and market penetration strategies. You'd think after building a tech company from the ground up, I'd have learned to delegate this stuff. But no, apparently I'm a glutton for punishment. I kept checking my watch, knowing Clara's party started at 8, but these guys flew in from Tokyo specifically for this meeting. What was I supposed to do? Tell them to reschedule, because my wife wanted to blow out some candles. So there I was, hustling down Fifth Avenue in my best Tom Ford suit, clutching a Tiffany box with Clara's birthday present inside, a vintage Cartier necklace that cost more than most people's cars. I was already rehearsing my apology speech. You know the drill. Sorry, babe, work ran late. But I'm here now and ready to celebrate the most amazing woman in Manhattan. Classic husband damage control. But as I approached the ballroom's entrance, something felt off. People were streaming out of the building like they were fleeing a fire drill, except they were all laughing and chatting like they'd just had the time of their lives. I checked my phone. It was barely 10 o'clock. What kind of birthday party ends at 10 on a Tuesday? Clara's crowd usually partied until the cleaning crew started giving them dirty looks. That's when I heard it. Well, look who finally decided to grace us with his presence. I turned to see Jessica Hartwell, one of Clara's society friends, strutting past me in a dress that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. She had that particular smirk that rich women perfect in boarding school, the one that says, I know something you don't, and I'm going to enjoy watching you figure it out. Mr. Always showing up late, she continued, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. How perfectly on brand. Her little entourage giggled like she'd just delivered the comedic performance of the century. My stomach dropped faster than the stock market in 2008. I pushed through the revolving doors into the lobby, and that's when I saw them. Clara, my wife of 8 years, the woman I'd built an empire with, standing there in a silver dress that caught the light like liquid mercury. She looked absolutely stunning, which somehow made what happened next even worse. She was holding hands with Adrian Blackstone, her supposedly just a colleague from the marketing department. You know, the guy with the perfectly styled hair and the kind of jawline that makes other men question their life choices. Clara saw me, and, I swear to God, she actually smirked. Not smiled, not looked surprised or embarrassed, or even guilty. She smirked like she'd been waiting for this exact moment. Oh, honey, she said, her voice carrying that fake concern that women use when they're about to deliver a knockout punch. Didn't you get my text? You weren't actually invited to this party. Let me tell you something about texts from your wife. When she says she sent one and you didn't get it, she's lying. I checked my phone right there in front of everyone, scrolling through our message history like some desperate loser looking for breadcrumbs of his own marriage. Nothing. Not a single message since yesterday morning when she'd reminded me to pick up her dry cleaning. Adrian stepped forward, and I could practically see the guy preening like a peacock who'd just discovered he had the biggest tail feathers in the zoo. Sorry, man, he said, but his grin suggested he was about as sorry as a kid who'd just gotten away with putting gum in the teacher's hair. Tonight's just for Clara's real friends. Real friends. Like I hadn't been bankrolling this woman's lifestyle for the better part of a decade. The lobby was still buzzing with her guests, and I could feel their eyes on me like I was some kind of zoo exhibit. Ladies and gentlemen, feast your eyes on the husband who thought he was invited to his own wife's birthday party. I could practically hear the commentary in my head. Some of them looked embarrassed for me, which somehow made it worse. There's nothing quite like pity from people you've been buying drinks for at charity galas for years. Clara adjusted her purse, a Hermes bag I'd bought her for Christmas, and took Adrian's arm like they were posing for some twisted version of a wedding photo. Thanks for paying for everything, though, she added, her voice as casual as if she was thanking me for holding a door. The flowers were gorgeous, and the champagne was absolutely divine. Cristal really does make everything more special. That's when it hit me. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment decision. This wasn't Clara suddenly deciding to exclude me because of some random argument we'd had. This was planned, orchestrated. She'd let me pay for the entire party, the venue, the food, the flowers, the band, the premium bar service, knowing full well she was going to humiliate me in front of everyone we knew. I was like some kind of unwitting financier to my own public execution. Adrian leaned in and whispered something in her ear that made her laugh, the kind of laugh she used to give me back when we were building the company together, back when we were a team instead of whatever this toxic mess had become. They brushed past me like I was invisible, like I was just another piece of furniture in this overpriced lobby. And you know what the worst part was? I didn't say anything. I didn't demand an explanation, didn't ask why, didn't even tell them what I really thought about their little performance. I just stood there like an idiot, watching my wife walk away with another man after spending my money on a party I wasn't welcome at. The rational part of my brain was screaming at me to do something, say something, make some kind of scene that would at least preserve a shred of my dignity. But instead, I turned on my heel and walked away. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to give people the reaction they're expecting. They wanted drama, tears, maybe some kind of public meltdown they could gossip about for months. Instead, they got nothing. Just a man in an expensive suit walking away with his dignity intact, even if his marriage was apparently circling the drain. As I handed my ticket to the valet, I couldn't help but think about the irony of the whole situation. I'd built a tech company worth hundreds of millions, survived boardroom battles that would make Game of Thrones look like a children's tea party, and negotiated deals with some of the shrewdest investors on Wall Street. But apparently, I couldn't even navigate my own marriage without walking face first into a humiliation that would probably be the talk of Manhattan's social scene for weeks. The valet brought my car around, and as I tipped him $20, I caught a glimpse of myself in the side mirror. I looked exactly like what I was. A successful businessman who'd just discovered that success in the boardroom doesn't automatically translate to success in the bedroom. Or in this case, success in not getting publicly dumped at your own wife's birthday party that you paid for. But as I drove through the neon-lit streets of Manhattan, something started brewing in my chest that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite sadness. It was something colder, more calculating. Something that reminded me why I'd been so good at building a company from nothing in the first place. Clara wanted to play games? Fine. But she'd just made one crucial mistake. She'd forgotten who actually held all the cards in this relationship. Time to remind her. You ever have one of those nights where you come home and suddenly your own penthouse feels like a crime scene? Yeah, that was me at 11:30 p.m., standing in my marble-floored foyer, still wearing the suit I'd planned to charm investors in. Except now it felt more like armor after a battle I didn't even know I was fighting. The elevator ride up to the 42nd floor had been the longest 90 seconds of my life. I kept replaying Clara's smirk, Adrian's cocky grin, the way her friends had looked at me like I was some kind of pathetic joke they'd been waiting months to laugh at. But you know what really got me? The sheer audacity of it all. The woman had literally used my credit card to humiliate me. It was like paying someone to punch you in the face and then saying thank you. I loosened my tie, a silk Hermes number that Clara had bought me for our anniversary last year, back when she still pretended to care about keeping up appearances, and headed straight for my home office. This room was my sanctuary, the one place in our shared space that was purely mine. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, a desk made from reclaimed teak that cost more than most people's annual salary, and enough high-tech gadgets to make Tony Stark jealous. But tonight, none of that mattered. Tonight, I was here for one thing. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk, the one with the biometric lock that only recognized my fingerprint, and pulled out a black leather folder. Not just any folder. This baby was thick as a phone book and labeled in gold embossing. Primary assets. I'd been maintaining this thing for years, updating it quarterly like some kind of obsessive accountant, and right now I was thanking my paranoid past self for being such a meticulous record keeper. See, here's what most people don't understand about successful marriages in Manhattan. They're basically business partnerships with better tax benefits and shared real estate. And like any smart businessman, I'd kept receipts. Lots and lots of receipts. I spread the contents across my desk like I was dealing cards for the world's most expensive poker game. First up, the corporate structure documents. Beautiful, boring legal paperwork that told a very simple story. I own 90% of Clarigen Technologies, the AI startup we'd built together. Clara might have been the face of the company, doing TED Talks and magazine interviews, but I was the guy who'd actually written the algorithms, secured the patents, and convinced venture capitalists to throw money at us like we were printing gold. The funny thing about being the quiet partner in a power couple is that everyone assumes you're just along for the ride. Clara had done such a good job playing the brilliant CEO role that half of Manhattan probably thought I was some kind of trophy husband. Little did they know that every line of code, every strategic decision, every major investor meeting had my fingerprints all over it. I was like the wizard behind the curtain, except instead of running Oz, I was running a company worth $300 million. Next in the pile, financial documents that would make an IRS agent weep with joy. Bank statements showing every transfer I'd made to Clara's personal accounts over the past 3 years. And let me tell you, those numbers were eye-watering. We're talking about $200,000 a month in living expenses that somehow included weekly spa treatments, a personal trainer who charged more than most lawyers, and enough designer clothes to stock a small boutique. Then there were the travel receipts. Oh, the travel receipts. First-class flights to Paris, Milan, Tokyo, all charged to my American Express Black Card. Hotel suites at the Four Seasons that cost more per night than most people's rent. Private jets for weekend getaways that Clara insisted were essential for networking. I'd been bankrolling her lifestyle like some kind of financial sugar daddy, and she'd been living it up while apparently planning to kick me out of my own life. But the real kicker? The invoices from tonight's party. Every single expense, meticulously documented because that's how you run a business and apparently how you run a marriage when your wife treats both like her personal piggy bank. The venue rental, $12,000. The catering, $18,000 for food that probably cost $3 to make. The floral arrangements, $8,000 for flowers that would be dead by morning. The premium bar service, $15,000 for top-shelf liquor that I wasn't even allowed to drink. I pulled out my calculator, and old-school Texas instruments that I'd had since college, because sometimes you need something tangible when you're dealing with numbers that feel too surreal to be real. $53,000. That's what Clara's little humiliation party had cost me. 53 grand for the privilege of being publicly dumped by my own wife in front of half of Manhattan's social elite. And let's talk about that guest list for a hot minute. I recognized most of the faces streaming out of that ballroom. And you know what they all had in common? They were people who'd benefited from my generosity over the years. Investment opportunities I'd shared, charity galas I'd sponsored, business connections I'd facilitated. These weren't Clara's friends. They were people who'd been networking with my money and my influence for years. Jessica Hartwell, the woman who delivered that delightful Mr. Always Showing Up Late singer, her husband's construction company had gotten a $1 million contract through connections I'd made. The Berkowitz couple who'd been laughing as they walked past me, I'd personally recommended them for membership at the country club where they spent every weekend. Even that smug investment banker whose name I couldn't remember, but whose face screamed, I peaked in prep school. I'd thrown business his way that probably bought him his summer house in the Hamptons. I sat back in my leather chair, the kind that cost more than most people's cars, and stared at the evidence spread before me. It was like looking at a financial autopsy of my marriage. Every receipt, every bank transfer, every investment told the same story. I'd been funding my own irrelevance for years. But here's the thing about being a successful entrepreneur. You don't get there by accepting bad deals, and you definitely don't get there by letting people walk all over you. Sure, I'd been blindsided tonight, caught completely off guard by Clara's little power play. But now I was in my element. This was just another business problem that needed solving, another challenge that required strategic thinking and cold, hard numbers. I opened my laptop and started pulling up account information. Corporate credit cards, travel accounts, investment portfolios. All the financial threads that held Clara's lifestyle together. It was like looking at a spider web, except instead of catching flies, this web had been catching my money for years while I'd been too busy building our empire to notice how much of it was flowing in one direction. The humiliation from tonight was already crystallizing into something much more useful: resolve. Pure, undiluted determination. Clara wanted to erase me from her public life? Fine. But she'd just made one catastrophic miscalculation. She'd forgotten that in this relationship, I wasn't just the guy who showed up late to parties. I was the guy who paid for them. I was the guy who made them possible in the first place. And if she thought she could use my money to humiliate me and then walk away hand in hand with her office boyfriend like nothing had happened, well, she was about to learn a very expensive lesson about the difference between being married to someone and actually owning them. I reached for my phone and started scrolling through my banking apps. Time to see just how much Clara's newfound independence was really worth without my financial backing. Spoiler alert, it wasn't going to be nearly as much as she thought. The folder sat open on my desk like a roadmap to revenge, and for the first time since walking into that ballroom, I started to smile. Not a happy smile. This was something colder, more calculated. This was the smile of a man who'd just realized he'd been playing checkers while everyone else thought they were playing chess. Game on, Clara. Game on. So here's the thing about having a photographic memory for passwords and account numbers. It comes in real handy when you're planning to systematically dismantle someone's entire financial universe at midnight on a Tuesday. I cracked my knuckles like some kind of digital hitman and fired up my laptop. Time for Clara to learn that actions have consequences, and consequences have price tags. First stop, Wanderlust Premium Travel Services, the concierge company that handled all of Clara's business trips. And by business trips, I mean romantic getaways disguised as professional development opportunities. I logged into the corporate account using credentials I'd memorized years ago when I was still naive enough to think transparency was a two-way street in our marriage. There it was, sitting in the pending reservations folder like a neon sign advertising my wife's infidelity. A 2-week trip to the Maldives, scheduled for next month. The Four Seasons private island, no less. Ocean villa with infinity pool, private butler service, couple spa treatments, and a price tag that would make a Saudi prince think twice. $120,000 for what the booking notes described as a romantic celebration getaway for two. The guest names? Clara Henderson Blackstone and Adrian Blackstone. Apparently, they'd already started hyphenating their names like some kind of twisted power couple. How thoughtful of them to plan their honeymoon on my dime while I was busy actually working for a living. I clicked cancel reservation with the same satisfaction most people get from popping bubble wrap. The system asked if I was sure I wanted to forfeit the 50% deposit. Oh, I was sure. I was so sure I could probably teach a masterclass in certainty. Watching that confirmation screen flash, reservation successfully canceled, was better than winning the lottery. Actually, it was better than winning the lottery because I was about to save $120,000 instead of just making money. But why stop there? I was just getting warmed up. Next target, the birthday party invoices. You'd think that after getting publicly humiliated at an event I'd paid for, the vendors would have at least had the decency to wait a few days before trying to cash their checks. But no, capitalism waits for no one's emotional recovery. I had 3 pending payments sitting in my business account, just waiting to be processed. Prestige catering services, $18,000 for food that I'd watched other people eat while being told I wasn't invited to consume it. Sterling floral design, $8,000 for arrangements that had probably already been thrown in the trash. Meridian Ballroom, $12,000 for the privilege of renting a space where my wife could publicly destroy me. Click, click, click. Stop payment on all 3. The banking system even asked me to provide a reason for each cancellation. I typed services not rendered as agreed, with the kind of petty satisfaction that probably wasn't healthy but felt absolutely fantastic in the moment. Now here's where things got interesting. I pulled up Clara's corporate credit card account, the Platinum American Express that I'd gotten her when she became the public face of our company. This wasn't just any credit card. This was the kind of plastic that opened doors, got you into exclusive restaurants without reservations, and basically served as a golden ticket to the lifestyle Clara had become accustomed to. The transaction history read like a diary of denial. Bergdorf Goodman, for $1,000 last Tuesday. Apparently, finding the perfect outfit for publicly dumping your husband requires premium shopping. Lou Bernardine, $800 for dinner for two last Friday. Guess who wasn't the plus one for that romantic evening? A jewelry store in Soho, $12,000 for something called promise rings. I nearly choked on my coffee. Promise rings. For her and Adrian. Bought with my money. I called the credit card company's Platinum customer service line, the one that connects you directly to a human being who actually speaks English and doesn't make you navigate through 17 different menu options. "This is Marcus Henderson," I said to the representative who answered on the second ring. "I need to immediately suspend card number ending in 7843. "Certainly, Mr. Henderson. May I ask the reason for the suspension?" "Unauthorized usage by a non-account holder." Technically true, since adultery wasn't exactly authorized when I'd added Clara as a user on the account. "The card has been suspended, sir. Is there anything else I can help you with tonight?" "Actually, yes. I want to see a detailed breakdown of every transaction from the past 6 months." 20 minutes later, I was staring at a PDF that read like a financial thriller novel. $237,000 in 6 months. That's almost 40 grand a month that Clara had been spending like she was trying to single-handedly stimulate the economy. Designer clothes, expensive dinners, luxury spa treatments, and enough jewelry to open her own Tiffany store. But the real masterpiece was yet to come. I logged into Clarigen Technologies' corporate banking system, the nerve center of our $300 million empire. This was where the serious money lived, where investor funds sat waiting to be deployed, where payroll got processed, where the magic happened that kept our 150 employees fed and our shareholders happy. I pulled up the main operational account, the one that held our working capital. $157 million, just sitting there like a dragon's hoard waiting for someone brave enough to claim it. This money represented years of grinding, of 18-hour days, of convincing skeptical investors that our AI technology was going to change the world. This money was the lifeblood of everything Clara had built her public persona around. And legally speaking, 90% of it belonged to me. I navigated to the transfer controls, the section of the banking system that only someone with my level of access could reach. The screen showed options for moving money between accounts, setting up automatic payments, and, most importantly for tonight's purposes, freezing funds. There was a little drop-down menu that said reason for freeze, with options like audit review, legal hold, and executive override. I selected executive override because, well, I was the chief executive and I was definitely overriding some things tonight. The system asked me to confirm the amount I wanted to freeze. I typed in $157 million, and for a moment, I just stared at those numbers on the screen. This wasn't just money, this was power. This was the ability to make or break not just Clara's lifestyle, but the livelihoods of everyone who worked for us. This was the nuclear option in corporate warfare. But you know what? Clara had fired the first shot when she decided to humiliate me in front of everyone we knew. She'd chosen to treat our marriage like a hostile takeover. So now she was going to learn what a real hostile takeover looked like. I clicked Confirm Freeze. The screen went blank for about 3 seconds, 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours, and then a message appeared. Funding pool locked. Access restricted to primary account holder only. Below that, in smaller text, this action has been logged and all authorized users have been notified via automated email. The click of that mouse felt better than any revenge speech I could have given at the party. It felt better than screaming, better than throwing things, better than any dramatic confrontation Clara had probably been expecting. This was clean, professional, and absolutely devastating. I leaned back in my chair and imagined the chaos that was about to unfold. Clara's phone would be buzzing with notifications about failed payment processing. The company's CFO would be getting automated alerts about frozen accounts. Our investors would start asking very pointed questions about why their money had suddenly become inaccessible. The payroll department would panic when they tried to process tomorrow's automatic deposits and got error messages instead. And the best part? It was all perfectly legal. I wasn't stealing anything, wasn't breaking any laws, wasn't even technically breaching any contracts. I was simply exercising my rights as the majority shareholder and primary account holder. If Clara wanted to run the company without me, she was welcome to try. But she'd be doing it without my money. I poured myself 3 fingers of Macallan 25, the good stuff that I kept in my office for closing big deals, and raised the glass in a toast to my empty penthouse. Here's to learning the difference between being married to someone and actually owning them, I said out loud. Because sometimes you need to hear your own voice to believe what you're doing is real. My phone started buzzing almost immediately. Text messages, missed calls, voicemails. I glanced at the screen and saw Clara's name flashing like a neon emergency signal. Then Adrian's number. Then half a dozen executives from the company. I turned the phone face down and took another sip of whiskey. They could all wait until morning. Tonight was about establishing new rules for a game Clara thought she'd already won. She wanted to play in the big leagues? Welcome to the major leagues, sweetheart. Population me. I spent the next hour going through every shared account, every joint credit line, every financial entanglement that connected Clara's lifestyle to my bank account. It was like performing surgery with a calculator, carefully severing each connection that had been funding my own humiliation. The irony wasn't lost on me. 6 hours ago, I'd been rushing to her party with a Cartier necklace, worried about being late and disappointing her. Now I was systematically dismantling the financial infrastructure that made her public life possible. It's amazing how quickly love can turn into strategy when someone shows you exactly how little you mean to them. By the time I finished, it was almost 2 in the morning. Manhattan was quiet except for the occasional taxi, honking 42 floors below. I looked out at the city lights, at all those windows representing other people's lives, other people's problems, other people's marriages that maybe weren't complete disasters. Tomorrow was going to be interesting. Tomorrow, Clara was going to wake up to a world where her credit cards didn't work, her travel plans had vanished, and the company she thought she controlled had suddenly become a very expensive paperweight. Tomorrow, she was going to learn that there's a big difference between being the face of a company and actually owning it. I closed the folder and locked it back in the drawer. The evidence would stay safe, just in case I needed to remind anyone how this particular game got started. But for now, I had a feeling the real fun was just beginning. You know what they say about the calm before the storm? Well, apparently the storm after the calm sounds like a phone that won't stop buzzing at 6 in the goddamn morning. I woke up to what can only be described as a digital apocalypse. My iPhone lighting up like a Christmas tree having an epileptic seizure, vibrating so hard it was practically doing the Macarena across my nightstand. I rolled over, squinting at the screen through eyes that felt like they'd been marinated in single malt scotch. 53 missed calls. 53. In the 3 hours I'd managed to sleep, half of Manhattan had apparently discovered that their favorite piggy bank had suddenly grown a spine and learned how to say no. The caller ID list read like a who's who of people I really didn't want to talk to before noon. Clara, 14 calls. Adrian, 8 calls, which was adorable considering he didn't even officially work for us anymore. Our company's CFO Richard Steinberg, 12 calls, and knowing Richard, he was probably having a coronary in his Park Avenue office. And various board members whose names I recognized, but whose actual jobs I'd never been entirely clear about. But here's the beautiful thing about being the guy who holds all the cards. You get to decide when the game starts. I turned my phone to silent, made myself a cup of Ethiopian coffee that cost more per pound than most people spend on groceries, and settled into my morning routine like it was any other Wednesday. Shower, shave, check the markets, read the Wall Street Journal, pretend that I wasn't currently engaged in financial warfare with my own wife. The peaceful morning lasted exactly until 11:15, when my doorman called to inform me that there was a very distressed young woman in the lobby who claimed she worked for Mrs. Henderson and desperately needed to speak with me. I almost told him to send her away, but curiosity got the better of me. Plus, I figured it might be entertaining to hear exactly how badly my little financial coup had disrupted Clara's perfectly orchestrated world. 5 minutes later, there was a knock on my door that sounded like someone was trying to beat it down with their bare hands. I opened it to find Rena Martinez, Clara's personal assistant, looking like she'd been put through a blender and then reassembled by someone who'd lost the instruction manual. Her usually immaculate hair was disheveled, her designer blouse was wrinkled, and she had the kind of dark circles under her eyes that suggested she'd been up all night dealing with what I imagined was a fairly spectacular meltdown. "Mr. Henderson," she gasped, like she'd just run a marathon instead of taking the elevator up 42 floors. "Thank God you're here." They're all losing their minds. Complete, total, certifiable insanity. I leaned against the doorframe, savoring the moment like a fine wine. "Define they, Rena. And maybe start with why you look like you've been through a natural disaster." She pushed past me into the apartment, which would have been rude under normal circumstances, but these weren't exactly normal circumstances. "The entire company is in chaos," she blurted out, turning to face me with the kind of wild-eyed desperation you usually see in disaster movies. "Payroll's frozen, the investor meeting got canceled because the presentation budget is locked, and half the department heads are threatening to quit because they can't access their project funds." I poured myself another cup of coffee, taking my sweet time with the cream and sugar. "Sounds like a management problem to me." "The credit card got declined at Starbucks," she continued, like this was somehow the most tragic part of the whole situation. "Clara sent me to get coffee for the emergency board meeting, and her corporate card got declined buying a $12 latte." "A $12 latte, Mr. Henderson." The barista looked at me like I was some kind of deadbeat. Now that was a mental image I could savor. Clara, the woman who'd spent $40,000 a month like it was Monopoly money, getting her credit card declined over a cup of overpriced coffee. If that wasn't poetic justice, I didn't know what was. "And the Maldives trip," Rena went on, apparently not done cataloging the disasters. "The travel agent called this morning saying the reservation was canceled and they're keeping the deposit." Clara screamed so loud I thought the windows were going to shatter. I mean, literally screamed. Like, horror movie-level screaming. I sat down in my favorite leather chair, the one that faced the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. "Rena, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. What, exactly, do you think I should do about any of this?" She stared at me like I'd just asked her to explain quantum physics in interpretive dance. "Well, you could, fix it, turn everything back on." Clara told everyone that this was just some kind of technical glitch and that you'd have it sorted out by this afternoon. I actually laughed out loud at that one. "A technical glitch? Is that what she's calling it?" "She said you two had a little spat, but that you'd never actually hurt the company over something personal." Rena's voice was getting smaller, like she was starting to realize that maybe Clara's confidence had been wildly misplaced. "She told the board that married couples fight all the time and that you'd come to your senses once you cooled down." "Come to my senses," I repeated slowly, tasting each word like it was a particularly bitter medicine. "Interesting perspective. Tell me, Rena, were you at the party last night?" She nodded, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Yes, sir. It was a beautiful event. The flowers were gorgeous, and the champagne was amazing, and did you happen to notice that I wasn't there?" Her face went through about 15 different expressions in the span of 3 seconds, finally settling on something that looked like she'd just realized she was standing in a minefield. I thought maybe you were running late from work." "I wasn't running late, Rena. I was uninvited. To a party that I paid for. By my wife, who spent the evening holding hands with her boyfriend. Do you see where I'm going with this?" The color drained from her face faster than water down a sink. Oh shit. "Oh, Mr. Henderson, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize that Clara had publicly humiliated me using my own money." "Yeah, most people didn't realize that. Funny how that works." She stood there for a moment, apparently trying to process the fact that this wasn't just some random marital squabble that would blow over by dinner time. This was full-scale nuclear warfare, and Clara had just discovered that she'd brought a water gun to a missile fight. What will it take?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "To fix this, I mean. To get everything back to normal." I set down my coffee cup and really looked at her for the first time since she'd arrived. Rena was a good kid, 26, fresh out of Columbia Business School, sharp as a tack, and unfortunately caught in the crossfire of a marriage that had just exploded in spectacular fashion. None of this was her fault, but she was about to become collateral damage in Clara's war against reality. Normal, I said, standing up and walking to the window. Rena, sweetheart, there is no normal anymore. Normal died last night when your boss decided to treat me like hired help at my own expense. But surely there's something. Oh, there's definitely something, I interrupted, turning back to face her. But it's not going to be what Clara wants to hear. See, your boss made a fundamental miscalculation. She thought she could humiliate me and then just carry on with business as usual. She thought I'd be so desperate to avoid a public divorce scandal that I'd quietly accept being turned into Manhattan's most expensive cuckold. Rena winced at the word cuckold, but I was just getting started. The problem is, Clara forgot something crucial in all her planning. She forgot that I'm not just her husband. I'm not just the guy who pays for her lifestyle. I'm the guy who built the empire she's been playing queen of. And empires belong to the people who build them, not the people who pose for pictures in front of them. I walked over to my desk and pulled out a piece of paper, expensive letterhead that I'd had printed years ago but never actually used. I'm going to write down exactly what it's going to take to resolve this situation. And you're going to deliver it to Clara personally. Not email, not text, not carrier pigeon. You're going to hand it to her and watch her read every single word. What kind of terms? Rena asked, though she looked like she really didn't want to know the answer. The kind that are going to teach your boss the difference between being married to someone and actually owning them, I said, picking up my fountain pen. The kind that are going to remind her that actions have consequences, and consequences have price tags. I started writing, and with each word, I could practically feel the balance of power shifting back to where it belonged. Clara wanted to play games? Fine, but she'd just learned that some games have rules, and some rules have teeth. You have 24 hours. I told Rena as I folded the paper and slid it into an envelope. Not 24 hours and 1 minute. Not whenever Clara gets around to it. 24 hours exactly, or everything I froze last night becomes permanent. Rena took the envelope like it was a live grenade, which, in a way, it was. And if she doesn't agree? I smiled, but it wasn't a particularly friendly smile. Then she's going to discover that building a tech empire is a lot harder than inheriting one. And that Manhattan society parties are a lot less fun when you can't afford to throw them. She left without another word, clutching that envelope like it contained the nuclear launch codes. Which, in a sense, it did. I watched her go, then poured myself a celebratory scotch even though it wasn't even noon yet. The storm was just getting started, and I was finally enjoying the weather. You know what's funny about revenge? Most people think it's this hot, passionate thing. All screaming and dramatic confrontations, and throwing expensive objects at walls. But real revenge, the kind that actually works, is cold as a winter morning in Alaska and twice as calculating. Real revenge is sitting down with a cup of premium coffee and a legal pad, methodically crafting the kind of document that's going to make your cheating wife's life very, very complicated. I spent the better part of 3 hours that afternoon in my home office, drafting what I like to think of as Clara's new reality check. The apartment was dead quiet except for the scratch of my fountain pen on paper and the occasional siren from the street below, background music for the systematic dismantling of someone's entire world. See, here's what Clara hadn't figured out yet. I wasn't some scorned husband having an emotional breakdown. I was a businessman who'd just discovered that his biggest investment had gone bad, and now it was time to cut losses and restructure the deal. This wasn't about hurt feelings or wounded pride anymore. This was about demonstrating to everyone involved exactly who held the real power in this relationship. The document I was crafting wasn't just a list of demands. It was a masterclass in corporate warfare disguised as a marital agreement. Every clause was designed to systematically strip away the illusions Clara had been living under while ensuring that I came out of this mess not just intact, but stronger than before. Term number 1 was simple and devastating. Clara resigns as CEO of Clarigen Technologies, effective immediately. No transition period, no graceful handoff, no saving face in front of the board. Just pack up your motivational posters and your overpriced ergonomic chair and get the hell out of the executive suite that I'd basically bought and paid for. The beautiful irony was that she'd built her entire public persona around being this brilliant tech CEO, but without my money and my algorithms backing her up, she was about as qualified to run a tech company as I was to perform brain surgery. I could already picture the board meeting where she'd have to announce this little development. All those investors who'd been charmed by her TED Talks and magazine interviews were about to discover that the Empress had no clothes, and more importantly, no actual technical skills or business acumen to speak of. Clara was great at playing CEO for the cameras, but when it came to the nuts and bolts of actually running a company, she was about as useful as a chocolate teapot. Term number 2 was even more satisfying. Adrian Blackstone's immediate termination with zero severance package. Not a golden parachute, not a transitional consulting fee, not even a decent reference letter. Just a security escort to clean out his desk and a permanent blacklist from every company in our professional network. The guy wanted to play house with my wife? Fine, but he could do it while updating his LinkedIn profile and explaining to future employers why his last job ended so abruptly. I made a mental note to personally ensure that Adrian's termination was handled with maximum humiliation. Maybe have security show up during lunch when the whole marketing department could watch him pack his personal items into a cardboard box. Maybe schedule it right before the quarterly all-hands meeting so everyone could speculate about why the golden boy was suddenly persona non grata. The possibilities were endless and equally entertaining. Term number 3 was where things got really interesting. I would be taking 2 permanent board seats, including one specifically designated as Financial Oversight Director. This wasn't just about having a voice in company decisions. This was about making sure that every dollar that flowed through Clarigen Technologies would have to pass through my approval first. Clara wanted to run a company? Great. But she'd be doing it with me watching every financial move she made like a hawk circling a particularly juicy rabbit. The Financial Oversight Director position was my own creation, a little constitutional amendment to our corporate structure that would give me veto power over any expenditure above $10,000. Want to hire a new marketing team? Better run it by me first. Planning a company retreat to some exotic location? Hope you've got a really good business justification ready. Thinking about giving yourself a raise? That's going to be a hard no from me, sweetheart. But the real masterpiece was term number 4. Clara would personally repay the company $157 million in structured installments over 3 years with zero interest, but only if she complied with every single clause of the agreement. This wasn't just about getting my money back. This was about creating a financial sword of Damocles hanging over her head for the next 36 months. The beauty of this particular clause was its psychological warfare potential. Every month for 3 years, Clara would have to write a check that reminded her exactly how much her little adultery adventure had cost her. Every payment would be a fresh humiliation, a monthly dose of reality about what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you premium dog food. And if she violated any part of the agreement, if she badmouthed me in public, if she tried to undermine my authority, if she so much as gave me a dirty look during a board meeting, the entire $157 million would become immediately due in full. Good luck explaining that cash flow problem to your accountant, Clara. I added a few additional clauses just for the sheer entertainment value. Clara would be required to issue a public statement acknowledging my role in building the company and apologizing for her errors in judgment. The press release would go out to every tech publication, every business journal, and every society blog that had ever written a puff piece about Manhattan's power couple. Let's see how her personal brand recovered from that little dose of honesty. She'd also be banned from using the company jet for personal travel, stripped of her corporate credit cards, and required to seek written approval for any media appearances or speaking engagements. Basically, I was turning her from a CEO into a very expensive intern with anger management issues. The final clause was my personal favorite, a non-disclosure agreement that prohibited Clara from discussing our marriage, our divorce proceedings, or any details about our business relationship with anyone outside of our immediate legal teams. This wasn't just about protecting my privacy. This was about making sure that Clara couldn't spin this story to make herself look like the victim. No crying to reporters about how mean her husband was being. No sympathy interviews about the challenges of being a woman in tech. No book deals about surviving corporate betrayal. I read through the document one more time, checking for loopholes or ambiguities that a smart lawyer might exploit. It was airtight, comprehensive, and absolutely devastating. Clara was about to learn that there's a big difference between being married to a tech mogul and actually being one yourself. The clock on my desk showed 4:47 p.m. I'd spent nearly 4 hours crafting this particular piece of legal poetry, and every minute had been worth it. This wasn't just a settlement agreement. This was a complete restructuring of Clara's entire existence, designed to remind her daily that actions have consequences and that some people are a lot better at playing hardball than others. I folded the document carefully and slid it into a manila envelope, then called down to my doorman. Patrick, could you have someone pick up an envelope for delivery? It needs to go to the Clarigen Technologies office building, 43rd floor, attention Clara Henderson. Hand delivery only, signature required. Of course, Mr. Henderson. Anything else? Yeah, I said, looking out at the Manhattan skyline where somewhere in a glass tower, my soon-to-be ex-wife was probably having the worst day of her professional life. Tell them it's urgent. As I sealed the envelope, I couldn't help but smile. Clara had spent last night thinking she'd won some kind of victory by humiliating me in public. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd confused tactics with strategy. Sure, she'd gotten her moment of triumph, her little power play in front of all her society friends. But I was about to show her the difference between winning a battle and winning a war. And this war? This war was going to be absolutely epic. You know that moment when you're enjoying a perfectly good evening of watching your enemies squirm from a distance, and then reality decides to come knocking on your door? Literally knocking, in this case, at exactly 3 p.m. on what had otherwise been a spectacularly satisfying Thursday night. I'd spent the evening doing what any reasonable person would do after delivering a corporate death sentence to his cheating wife, drinking expensive scotch and reading the Wall Street Journal like nothing had happened. My phone had been buzzing all day with increasingly frantic calls from various board members, investors, and what I assumed were Clara's flying monkeys, but I'd maintained radio silence like a submarine captain in enemy waters. The beauty of having the nuclear codes to your own company is that everyone else can panic while you sit back and enjoy the show. I'd been imagining Clara's day, trying to explain to increasingly skeptical investors why the company's operational funds had suddenly become inaccessible, fielding calls from vendors whose payments had bounced, and probably downing enough Xanax to tranquilize a rhinoceros. So when that knock came, not the polite tap of a neighbor or the professional rap of a doorman, but the desperate, urgent pounding of someone who'd reached the end of their rope, I knew exactly who it was before I even looked through the peephole. Clara stood in my hallway looking like she'd been put through an industrial washing machine and hung out to dry on a highway. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled in a way that screamed, expensive salon visit gone horribly wrong. Her makeup was smudged like she'd been crying for hours, and she was wearing what looked suspiciously like the same clothes from yesterday. The woman who'd never been seen in public without looking like she'd stepped off the cover of Forbes was standing at my door, looking like a refugee from her own life. I opened the door slowly, savoring the moment like a fine wine. Well, look who decided to pay me a visit. Did you lose your way to Adrian's place? Or is he not taking your calls anymore? Her shoulders sagged like someone had let all the air out of her. Please, Marcus. Can I come in? We need to talk. Do we? Because last time I checked, I wasn't invited to conversations about our relationship. Something about not being invited to things that concern me. I leaned against the doorframe, making it clear that entry to my sanctuary wasn't going to be automatic. But sure, come on in. Mi casa es su casa. Or should I say, mi casa es mi casa, since apparently we're not sharing things anymore. She walked past me into the apartment, and I could practically smell the desperation coming off her in waves. This wasn't the confident, radiant woman who'd been holding hands with her boyfriend 48 hours ago. This was someone who'd spent the day discovering that the real world was a lot less forgiving than the carefully curated bubble she'd been living in. I didn't think you'd actually do this, she said, turning to face me with the kind of expression you usually see on people who've just realized they've been playing Russian roulette with a fully loaded gun. I mean, I knew you were upset about the party, but I didn't think you'd actually shut down the entire company. Upset, I repeated slowly, like I was tasting a foreign word. Upset is when someone cuts you off in traffic, Clara. Upset is when your favorite restaurant runs out of the good wine. What I am is disappointed. Disappointed that my wife of 8 years decided to publicly humiliate me at a party I paid for while announcing our marriage was over via interpretive handholding with her office boyfriend. She flinched like I'd slapped her. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Adrian and I, We've been trying to figure out how to handle this situation and handle this situation? I laughed, but it wasn't a particularly friendly sound. You mean handle the situation where you've been screwing your coworker while I've been bankrolling your lifestyle? That situation. I was going to tell you, she said, her voice getting smaller. I didn't know how to stop it. Adrian was so confident, so sure of himself, and I felt like I was losing myself in our marriage. Like I was just Mrs. Marcus Henderson instead of Clara Henderson, and I. Oh, spare me the self-discovery narrative, I interrupted. You weren't finding yourself, sweetheart. You were shopping for an upgrade while keeping the original warranty active. The only problem is you forgot to read the fine print on that warranty. She moved to the living room and sank onto my couch like she owned the place, which was rich considering she'd spent the last 2 days acting like I was a stranger. I admit I handled things badly. It was a mistake. I should have talked to you privately first. A mistake, I said, following her into the room but remaining standing. Like accidentally ordering the wrong wine at dinner. Clara, you planned an entire evening around erasing me from your life while using my credit card to pay for it. That's not a mistake. That's performance art. She looked up at me with those big brown eyes that had once made me forget my own name, but now just reminded me of how stupid I'd been for the past few months. I was afraid, she whispered. Afraid that if I defended you in front of my friends, they'd think I was weak, that I couldn't stand on my own 2 feet. So instead you decided to prove you could stand on your own 2 feet by cutting off the legs that were holding you up, I said. Brilliant strategy. Really shows that MBA from Wharton was money well spent. Marcus, please. She stood up and took a step toward me, and for a moment I could see the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. Before the society parties and the magazine interviews and the slow transformation into someone I barely recognized. I know I screwed up. I know I hurt you. And I know I made everything worse by handling it the way I did. But we can fix this. We can work it out. Fix this. I looked at her like she'd just suggested we could fix the Titanic with duct tape and good intentions. Clara, sweetheart, you can't unring a bell. You can't unexpose someone's dirty laundry in front of half of Manhattan. And you definitely can't unfuck your coworker. She winced again, but pressed on. I'll end things with Adrian. I'll make a public statement apologizing for everything. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. Whatever it takes, I repeated. That's interesting, because I actually have a very specific list of what it's going to take. Rena delivered it to you earlier today. Tell me, what did you think of my terms? Her face went through about 17 different expressions before settling on something that looked like she'd just bitten into a lemon filled with broken glass. Those terms are, they're completely unreasonable. You're asking me to give up everything I've worked for. Everything you've worked for, I said, walking to the window and looking out at the city lights. You mean everything I've worked for while you've been playing CEO for the cameras? There's a difference, Clara. A pretty significant difference. The company was our joint effort. The company was my vision, my code, my algorithms, and my money, I interrupted. You were the spokesperson. A very attractive, very articulate spokesperson, but let's not confuse marketing with engineering. She was quiet for a long moment, and I could practically hear the gears turning in her head as she tried to figure out some angle, some way to spin this situation back in her favor. Finally, she said, what about a compromise? We could restructure the terms, make them more equitable. I turned back to face her, and I must have been smiling because she took an involuntary step backward. Equitable. You want to talk about equitable after you spent the last 6 months fucking another man on my dime? After you publicly humiliated me in front of everyone we know? After you tried to erase me from our company's origin story? I never tried to. Clara, I've seen the press interviews. I've read the magazine articles where you talk about your vision for the company and how you built something from nothing. Funny how my name rarely comes up in those stories. She had the decency to look ashamed, but it was too little, too late. I was trying to establish my own credibility in the industry. You have to understand, being married to the guy who actually built the technology made people assume I was just along for the ride. So instead of proving them wrong, you decided to pretend I didn't exist, I said. Real power move there, sweetheart. I'll sign your agreement, she said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Whatever you want. I'll resign from the CEO position. I'll pay back the money. I'll make the public statement. Just Please don't destroy everything we built together. I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who'd shared my bed and my dreams for 8 years, who'd gone from being my partner to being my biggest liability. It's not about signing the agreement, Clara. It's about acknowledging what you actually did. It's about admitting that you didn't just cheat on me. You tried to steal my life's work and then throw me away like yesterday's newspaper. I admit it, she said, tears starting to flow down her cheeks. I admit that I was selfish and stupid and cruel. I admit that I took you for granted and treated you like you were disposable when you're the reason any of this exists in the first place. For the first time in 48 hours, she was telling the truth. And you know what? It felt pretty damn good to hear it. Good, I said. That's a start. But admitting it to me isn't enough. You need to admit it to everyone else too. Every investor, every employee, every society reporter who ever wrote a puff piece about Manhattan's power couple. You need to tell the truth about who actually built this empire and who was just posing for pictures in front of it. She nodded frantically, like a bobblehead doll in an earthquake. Yes, anything. I'll do anything to make this right. I handed her a tissue and watched her try to repair the damage to her makeup. We'll see about that, Clara. We'll see about that. The woman who'd walked into my apartment an hour ago had been desperate. The woman who was leaving was something else entirely. Defeated, humbled, and finally ready to face the consequences of thinking she could play in the big leagues without knowing the rules. Tomorrow was going to be very interesting indeed. There's something deeply satisfying about walking into a room full of people who've been scrambling like headless chickens for the past 48 hours, especially when you're the guy who's been calmly orchestrating their panic from the comfort of your leather armchair. The Clarigen Technologies boardroom at 9 a.m. sharp on Friday morning was like a scene from a corporate thriller, except instead of being the guy getting fired, I was the one holding the pink slips. I'd chosen my outfit carefully for this little performance, my best Tom Ford suit, the navy. One that cost more than most people's monthly rent, paired with Italian leather shoes that clicked authoritatively against the marble floors as I made my entrance. When you're about to restructure someone's entire universe, you might as well look good doing it. The glass-walled conference room overlooked Manhattan from the 43rd floor, and on any other day, the view would have been breathtaking. Today, though, all eyes were focused on the long mahogany table where our company's future was about to be decided. The irony wasn't lost on me that this was the same room where Clara had been holding court for months, playing queen of the tech world, while I'd been content to stay in the background pulling the actual strings. Clara was already seated at the far end of the table, looking like she'd aged about 5 years since her midnight visit to my apartment. Her usually immaculate appearance had been replaced by something that screamed damage control. Conservative business attire, minimal makeup, and the kind of haunted expression you see on politicians who've just been caught with their hands in the cookie jar. She wouldn't meet my eyes, which was probably smart, considering what was about to happen to her career. The rest of the board was a collection of nervous energy and barely contained panic. Richard Steinberg, our CFO, looked like he'd been mainlining espresso and antacids for the past 2 days. Jennifer Walsh from Investor Relations kept checking her phone like she was expecting news that the apocalypse had been officially scheduled. Even Marcus Chun, our usually unflappable legal counsel, had the expression of a man who'd just realized he was about to witness either a miracle or a massacre. But the most notable absence was Adrian Blackstone, who was conspicuously not sitting in his usual spot 3 seats down from Clara. Apparently, someone had finally clued him in that showing up to a board meeting when you're about to be terminated might not be the smartest career move. I made a mental note to ask security for the footage of his desk cleaning ceremony. I had a feeling it would make excellent entertainment for future boring evenings. I took my seat at the head of the table, the spot that had technically been mine all along but that I'd rarely bothered to occupy. Funny how quickly things change when you stop being polite and start being real about who actually owns what. "Good morning, everyone," I said, setting my leather portfolio on the table with just enough force to make everyone jump slightly. "I assume you're all wondering why I called this meeting." Richard cleared his throat nervously. "Marcus, we really need to discuss the funding freeze. The payroll department is having a meltdown, and we've got 3 major vendors threatening to suspend services if—" "Richard," I interrupted, holding up one hand. "Before we discuss operational concerns, I think we need to address some fundamental issues about company leadership and accountability." I opened my portfolio and pulled out the agreement I'd spent Wednesday afternoon crafting, along with a second document that I'd prepared specifically for this moment. As you're all aware, there have been some irregularities in how this company has been managed recently. Issues of transparency, fiscal responsibility, and professional conduct that need immediate attention. Clara shifted in her seat like she was sitting on hot coals, but she still didn't look up. Smart woman. Eye contact at this point would have been like staring directly into the sun. Effective immediately, I continued. There will be some changes to our executive structure. First, Clara Henderson will be resigning from her position as Chief Executive Officer, effective today. The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a pin drop in the next building. Jennifer Walsh's mouth actually fell open, and Richard looked like he'd just been told that gravity was optional. Even Marcus Chun, who'd probably seen every kind of corporate drama imaginable, seemed stunned by the matter-of-fact way I'd just detonated Clara's career. Additionally, I went on, savoring every word like fine wine. Adrian Blackstone's employment with Clarigen Technologies has been terminated, effective immediately, with no severance package. His access to company systems, facilities, and resources has been revoked, and security has been notified to escort him from the premises should he attempt to return. That got some actual gasps from around the table. Apparently, everyone had suspected something was going on between Clara and Adrian, but nobody had expected it to result in such swift and decisive consequences. Welcome to the real world, kids, where actions have consequences and consequences have price tags. Clara finally looked up, and the expression on her face was equal parts resignation and relief. She'd probably been dreading this moment since I'd handed her that agreement. But now that it was actually happening, she seemed almost grateful to have it over with. I want to make something very clear to everyone in this room, I said, standing up and walking to the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. This company was built on my vision, my technology, and my financial backing. For the past several months, there seems to have been some confusion about these basic facts. I turned back to face the table, making eye contact with each board member in turn. Let me clear up that confusion right now. I am the majority shareholder, I am the primary patent holder, and I am the person who has been funding this operation from day one. Anyone who has a problem with that reality is welcome to submit their resignation along with Clara's. Richard raised his hand tentatively, like a student asking permission to use the bathroom. What about the investor meetings? The client presentations? Clara's been the face of the company for. Clara has been a very effective spokesperson, I acknowledged. But there's a significant difference between being the face of something and actually building it. Moving forward, this company will be run by the people who actually understand the technology, the people who actually created the algorithms, and the people who actually own the intellectual property. I walked back to my seat and pulled out a second document. Which brings me to the new organizational structure. I will be assuming the role of Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. Additionally, I will be taking 2 permanent board seats, including the newly created position of Financial Oversight Director. Jennifer Walsh found her voice first. What exactly does Financial Oversight Director entail? I'm glad you asked, I said, smiling for the first time since entering the room. The Financial Oversight Director will have veto power over any company expenditure exceeding $10,000. Every major financial decision, every significant contract, every executive compensation package will require my personal approval. The implications of this hit the room like a freight train. I wasn't just taking control of the company. I was essentially making it impossible for anyone to spend a dime without my permission. Clara had learned the hard way what happened when people took my money for granted. Now everyone else was going to learn the same lesson. Furthermore, I continued, Clara will be personally repaying the company $157 million in structured installments over the next 3 years. The repayment schedule and terms are outlined in the agreement she'll be signing today. Marcus Chin finally spoke up. Marcus, I have to ask, is this legal? Can you actually enforce these kinds of terms? I smiled again, and this time it was definitely predatory. Marcus, I own 90% of this company. I can enforce any terms I want, as long as they're within the bounds of corporate law. And I can assure you, everything in these documents has been carefully reviewed by some very expensive attorneys. Clara stood up slowly, like she was moving underwater. I'll sign whatever you need me to sign, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I want to apologize to everyone here. Marcus built this company, and I lost sight of that. I let personal issues cloud my professional judgment, and I take full responsibility for the consequences. It was probably the most honest thing she'd said in months, and you could see the shock on everyone's faces. The Clara they'd known, confident, assertive, sometimes borderline arrogant, had been replaced by someone who actually understood the magnitude of what she'd lost. I slid the agreement across the table to her. Sign on page 7, initial pages 3, 5, and 9. She signed without even reading it, which was probably smart, considering the document contained some additional clauses I hadn't bothered to mention yet. Things like non-compete agreements, media restrictions, and a particularly creative clause about public statements that would keep her from bad-mouthing me for the next 5 years. As Clara's pen finished the final signature, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, complete and total control over my own life. For months, I've been watching from the sidelines as my wife built a public persona around my work while planning to replace me with a younger model. Now, finally, the natural order had been restored. Excellent, I said, collecting the signed documents. Jennifer, please prepare a press release announcing the leadership transition. Richard, the funding freeze will be lifted as soon as these organizational changes are officially filed. Marcus, I'll need you to update all the corporate documents to reflect the new structure. I stood up and straightened my tie. Oh, and one more thing. Clara's office will need to be cleared out by end of business today. I'll be moving into the executive suite on Monday morning. As I walked toward the door, I turned back for one final moment. Welcome to the new Clarigen Technologies, everyone. I think you're going to find it's a much more efficiently run operation. The silence behind me was deafening, but I could practically feel the respect in the room. For the first time in months, nobody was looking at me like Clara's husband who happened to know some code. They were looking at me like the guy who built a $300 million empire and wasn't afraid to take it back when someone tried to steal it. The revolution was complete, and it felt absolutely fantastic. You know what's funny about revenge? Everyone thinks it's the end game, the final boss battle where you vanquish your enemies and then ride off into the sunset feeling all satisfied and complete. But here's the thing nobody tells you about revenge. It's actually just the appetizer. The real main course is what you do with your life after you've finished destroying the people who tried to destroy you. 2 weeks after the boardroom revolution that had basically nuked Clara's entire professional existence, I was sitting in my Tesla outside a converted warehouse in Brooklyn, staring at a hand-painted sign that read Bright Layer AI. Innovating tomorrow, today. The slogan was cheesy as hell, but there was something refreshingly honest about a startup that didn't try to hide behind corporate speak and million-dollar marketing budgets. This wasn't some random visit. I'd been tracking Bright Layer for months, ever since their founder had pitched to Clara and gotten shot down faster than a paper airplane in a hurricane. See, about 6 months ago, this young developer named Lila Chun had waltzed into our conference room with a revolutionary idea for adaptive AI learning systems. The kind of technology that could genuinely change how machines process information, not just make existing systems marginally more efficient. Clara had dismissed the whole thing in about 15 minutes. Too niche, she'd said, waving her hand like she was swatting away an annoying fly. The market isn't ready for that level of complexity. We need to focus on commercial applications that can scale immediately. Translation: she didn't understand the technology well enough to see its potential, so she decided it was garbage. I, on the other hand, had been quietly following Lila's progress ever since. While Clara was busy playing CEO and planning her exit strategy with Adrian, I'd been watching this kid basically revolutionize artificial intelligence from a warehouse in Brooklyn with nothing but determination, brilliant code, and what appeared to be an unlimited supply of energy drinks. The building itself looked like every other startup workspace in Brooklyn. Exposed brick walls, industrial lighting, and the kind of deliberately casual aesthetic that screamed, "We're too cool for traditional office space." But as I walked through the front door, I could immediately tell this wasn't just another tech bro operation trying to disrupt the breakfast industry or create an app for raiding your neighbor's lawn. The main workspace was buzzing with the kind of focused energy you only see when people are working on something they actually believe in. About a dozen developers were scattered around high-end workstations, and the walls were covered with whiteboards full of algorithms that made my engineers' hearts sing. These weren't people playing startup. These were people building the future. Lila spotted me before I'd made it 3 steps into the workspace. She was exactly what you'd expect from a 26-year-old MIT grad who decided to revolutionize AI instead of taking a safe job at Google. Jeans, sneakers, and a hoodie that probably cost less than Clara spent on lunch, but with the kind of sharp, intelligent eyes that told you she could probably code circles around half of Silicon Valley. Marcus Henderson, she said, walking over with a grin that was equal parts excited and nervous. I have to admit, when your assistant called and said you wanted to visit, I thought it was some kind of prank. Aren't you supposed to be running Clarigen Technologies? Things change, I said, looking around at the workspace with genuine appreciation. Sometimes they change pretty dramatically. Mind giving me the grand tour. For the next hour, Lila walked me through Brightlayer's technology stack, and I have to say, it was like being a kid in the world's smartest candy store. What she'd built wasn't just innovative. It was the kind of breakthrough that comes along maybe once in a decade. Her adaptive learning algorithms could process and integrate new information in ways that made existing AI systems look like pocket calculators. The best part? She'd done it all with a shoestring budget and a team of developers who were working for equity and the promise of changing the world. No corporate bureaucracy, no marketing department dictating technical decisions, no executives who thought machine learning was something that happened at the gym. The problem we keep running into, Lila explained as we stood in front of a wall-sized monitor displaying real-time performance metrics, is funding. We've got the technology, we've got the team, but trying to scale without serious capital is like trying to build a rocket ship with a bicycle budget. How much are we talking about? I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew the answer. For proper scaling? To build out the infrastructure, hire the additional talent we need, and really push this technology to market. She paused, probably trying to figure out if she was about to scare away her first real investor. We're looking at about $12 million for the next 18 months. $12 million. Clara had probably spent more than that on her wardrobe over the past 3 years. I'd watched her drop 20 grand on a single dinner party without blinking. But here was someone asking for enough money to potentially revolutionize artificial intelligence, and she was nervous about whether it was too much. Tell me something, Lila, I said, leaning against one of the workstations. When you pitched to Clarigen 6 months ago, what did you think of the rejection? Her face went through about 6 different expressions before settling on diplomatic frustration. Honestly, I thought it was short-sighted. The technology speaks for itself, but I got the impression that the decision-makers were more interested in safe, incremental improvements than genuine innovation. The decision-makers, I repeated. You mean Clara? I mean whoever was making the call, she said carefully. Though I have to say, after doing my research on Clarigen's technical foundation, I was surprised the company wasn't more interested in next-generation AI development. Smart kid. She'd basically just told me that she knew I was the real brains behind Clarigen without directly insulting my soon-to-be ex-wife. Diplomatic and technically brilliant. Exactly the kind of person you want running a company that's actually going to change the world. Here's the thing, Lila, I said, pulling out my phone. I'm about to make you an offer, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. I'm prepared to provide $12 million in seed funding, plus an additional $8 million for expansion capital. In exchange, I want a 40% equity stake and a seat on your board of directors. The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. Are you serious? $20 million. Dead serious. But I'm not just offering money. I'm offering partnership. My technical expertise, my industry connections, my experience building and scaling AI companies. This isn't just an investment. It's me betting my reputation on your vision. She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the wall of algorithms like they might provide some guidance on how to handle having your entire professional life change in the span of 30 seconds. Finally, she looked back at me with tears in her eyes. Yes, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. God, yes. You have no idea what this means. Actually, I do, I said, thinking about the last 2 weeks of systematically dismantling Clara's empire and rebuilding my own life from scratch. I know exactly what it means to get a second chance to build something real. We spent the next 2 hours going over technical specifications, business plans, and growth projections. By the time I left Brightlayer that afternoon, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, genuine excitement about the future. Not the hollow satisfaction of destroying my enemies, but the deep, sustainable joy of creating something meaningful. As I drove back into Manhattan, I couldn't help but contrast this visit with the countless corporate meetings I'd sat through at Clarigen, where half the conversation was about optics and market positioning and maintaining our competitive advantage. At Brightlayer, the only thing anyone cared about was building technology that could actually make the world better. Clara had spent months trying to erase me from our company's origin story, painting herself as the visionary founder while I played the role of supportive tech husband. But sitting in that Brooklyn warehouse, watching Lila's team work on algorithms that could revolutionize how machines think, I realized something important. I didn't need to be part of someone else's story anymore. I was ready to write my own. The funny thing about having your life blown up by your cheating wife is that it forces you to figure out who you really are when you strip away all the external validation and social expectations. For 8 years, I'd been Marcus Henderson, husband of tech CEO Clara Henderson. For the past 2 weeks, I'd been Marcus Henderson, the guy who'd spectacularly destroyed his wife's career and taken back his company. But driving through Brooklyn that afternoon, I realized I was ready to be something else entirely. Marcus Henderson, the guy who found the next generation of technological innovators and helped them change the world. It beat the hell out of being known as the guy whose wife screwed him over at his own birthday party. The quiet satisfaction I felt wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about possibility. About building something new instead of just tearing down something old. About finding people who shared my vision of what technology could accomplish when it wasn't filtered through corporate bureaucracy and personal agendas. Clara could keep her society parties and her magazine interviews and her carefully curated public persona. I had something better. The chance to work with people who cared more about changing the world than looking good while they did it. And honestly, that felt like the best revenge of all. You know what's better than revenge? Watching your ex-wife publicly admit that she's been taking credit for your life's work while simultaneously apologizing for treating you like a financial ATM with a wedding ring. And you know what's even better than that? Getting to approve the exact wording of that apology like you're editing a particularly satisfying piece of corporate fiction. It was a crisp Tuesday morning in November when Clara and I met at Café Luna, one of those overpriced Manhattan coffee shops where investment bankers go to feel cultured and society wives gather to plan charity galas that are really just excuses to show off their latest Hermes bags. I'd chosen the location specifically because it was public enough that Clara couldn't make a scene, but private enough that we could have a real conversation without half of Manhattan's social elite pretending not to eavesdrop. Clara was already waiting when I arrived, sitting at a corner table and staring at her laptop screen like it contained the nuclear launch codes. She looked different. Gone was the perfectly styled hair and the designer outfit that screamed, "I'm too important to check price tags." Instead, she was wearing jeans and a simple sweater, minimal makeup, and the kind of resigned expression you see on people who finally accepted that their 15 minutes of fame are officially over. "Morning, Clara," I said, sliding into the seat across from her. "Working on anything interesting?" She looked up, and for a split second, I saw a flash of the woman I'd fallen in love with 8 years ago. Before the magazine covers and the TED Talks and the slow transformation into someone I barely recognized. "The public statement," she said quietly. "I've been working on it for 3 days, and I can't get it right." I ordered a double espresso from the hovering waitress. When you're about to review your ex-wife's public mea culpa, you need serious caffeine, and leaned back in my chair. "Let's see what you've got." She turned the laptop toward me, and I have to admit, I was curious to see how Clara was going to spin 8 years of taking credit for my work into something that resembled an actual apology. The draft on her screen was, well, it was pure Clara. Lots of flowery language about shared visions and collaborative partnerships and mutual respect, but very light on the actual facts. "This reads like a press release from a couple's therapy session," I said after scanning through the first paragraph. "You're apologizing for not communicating better, not for systematically erasing me from our company's history while planning to dump me for your office boyfriend." She winced, but didn't argue. I'm trying to find a way to be honest without completely destroying what's left of my reputation. Your reputation, I repeated slowly. Clara, sweetheart, your reputation was built on taking credit for my algorithms while I was too polite to correct the record. Maybe it's time to build a new reputation based on something slightly more authentic. For the next 2 hours, we sat in that overpriced cafe and crafted what was essentially Clara's professional obituary. Every sentence was negotiated like a hostage situation, with me pushing for actual truth and Clara trying to find ways to minimize the damage to her carefully constructed public persona. The breakthrough came when I finally said, "Look, you can either tell the truth voluntarily, or I can hold a press conference and tell it for you. Your choice, but one way or another, the real story is coming out." That's when she finally stopped trying to salvage her image and started focusing on damage control. We rewrote the entire thing from scratch, and by the time we were finished, it was a masterpiece of public accountability. Not because it was particularly eloquent or well-crafted, but because it was actually honest for the first time in years. The final version read like this. After careful consideration and reflection on recent events, I want to address some misconceptions about the founding and development of Clarigen Technologies. While I have served as CEO and been the public face of the company, I must acknowledge that the foundational vision, technical innovation, and primary financial backing came from my husband, Marcus Henderson. Marcus developed the core algorithms that power our AI systems, secured the initial patents, and provided the strategic technical leadership that made our company possible. My role was primarily in business development and public relations, though I allowed myself to be portrayed as the primary founder in various media appearances. I deeply regret that my recent personal choices have overshadowed the professional integrity that should define our company. I failed to properly credit Marcus for his contributions, and I failed to maintain the personal and professional standards expected of someone in my position. Effective immediately, I am stepping down as CEO of Clarigen Technologies to ensure that the company is led by someone who fully understands both the technical foundations and the responsibility that comes with that role. Marcus will be assuming the CEO position, and I will be working to ensure a smooth transition. I apologize to our employees, investors, and partners for any confusion my actions may have caused, and I take full responsibility for the mistakes in judgment that led to this situation. Clarigen Technologies remains a strong company with revolutionary technology, and I am confident that under Marcus's leadership, it will continue to thrive and innovate. I also want to apologize personally to Marcus for failing to defend him when it mattered most, and for allowing personal issues to compromise our professional relationship. He built the foundation of our company, and I should have made that clear from the beginning. Reading through the final draft, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, satisfaction that didn't come from destroying someone else. This wasn't just Clara admitting she'd screwed up. This was her finally telling the truth about who had actually built the empire she'd been ruling over. "This is good," I said, closing the laptop. Honest, direct, takes responsibility without making excuses. "When are you planning to release it?" "Tomorrow morning," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "All the major tech publications, the business journals, and the society pages." The society pages. That was the part that was really going to sting for Clara. Having her professional reputation take a hit was one thing, but having all her Manhattan social circle read about how she'd been taking credit for her husband's work while cheating on him, that was going to hurt in ways that quarterly earnings reports never could. "You know this is going to change everything, right?" I said. "Your speaking engagements, your board positions, your whole public persona. People are going to remember this." She nodded, looking like someone who'd just realized they were about to jump out of an airplane without checking if their parachute was properly packed. "I know, but it's time. I've been living a lie for so long that I'd forgotten what the truth even looked like." We sat in silence for a moment, two people who'd once planned to build a life together now negotiating the terms of how to tear it down with maximum honesty and minimum collateral damage. "For what it's worth," Clara said finally, "I am sorry. Not just about the statement or the company or even Adrian. I'm sorry that I turned into someone who could treat you the way I did. You deserved better. And you know what? She was right. I had deserved better. I deserved a wife who was proud of our partnership instead of trying to erase me from it. I deserved someone who wanted to build something together instead of stealing credit and planning an exit strategy. But sitting in that cafe, watching Clara finally take responsibility for the choices that had blown up our marriage and her career, I realized something important. I didn't need her apology anymore. I didn't need her acknowledgement or her regret or her admission that she'd been wrong. What I needed was exactly what I was getting, the truth, told publicly, by the person who'd been lying about it for years. The statement went live at 8 a.m. the next morning, simultaneously posted to Clara's LinkedIn, Twitter, and Medium accounts, and sent as a press release to every major tech publication. By 9 a.m., my phone was ringing nonstop with reporters wanting to confirm the details, investors asking about the leadership transition, and industry analysts trying to figure out what this meant for Clarigen's future. But the best call came at 10:15 a.m. from Lila at Brightlayer. "Holy shit, Marcus," she said, and I could hear the excitement in her voice. "Did you see the TechCrunch article? They're calling you the silent genius behind one of the decade's most innovative AI companies. This is huge for the industry. Finally, people are going to know who really built that technology." And that's when it hit me. This wasn't just about Clara admitting her mistakes or salvaging what was left of our professional relationship. This was about setting the record straight for everyone who'd ever wondered how someone with Clara's background had supposedly revolutionized artificial intelligence overnight. The truth was finally out there, and it felt better than any revenge I could have imagined. The industry chatter was immediate and brutal. Within hours, think pieces were appearing about the hidden technical founders behind high-profile companies, and Clara's name was being used as a cautionary tale about the difference between being a CEO and actually understanding the technology your company produces. It was exactly what she deserved and exactly what I needed. Not vindication for my wounded pride, but recognition for the work I'd been doing all along. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's simply making sure everyone knows the truth about who they really are. You know what nobody tells you about winning? It's not nearly as satisfying as you think it's going to be. Don't get me wrong. Watching Clara's carefully constructed empire crumble while I reclaimed everything that was rightfully mine had been spectacular. But after the dust settled and the lawyers finished dividing up our assets and the tech industry finished gossiping about Manhattan's most expensive divorce, I was left with something I hadn't experienced in years: the complete freedom to figure out who I actually wanted to be. 6 months after Clara's public statement had torpedoed what was left of her reputation, I was standing in the living room of my new apartment on the Upper West Side, looking out at a view that didn't require me to remember which furniture my cheating ex-wife had picked out. The place was smaller than the penthouse. Only 2 bedrooms instead of 4, no marble floors or crystal chandeliers or any of the other expensive crap that had been cluttering up my life for the past 8 years. But it had something the penthouse never had: sunlight. Actual, honest-to-God natural light streaming through windows that faced east toward the park, filling the space with warmth that no amount of designer lighting could replicate. It was the kind of simple pleasure you forget exists when you're busy trying to maintain a lifestyle that looks impressive on Instagram, but feels hollow as hell in real life. The apartment itself was a study in deliberate simplicity. Comfortable furniture that I'd actually chosen based on whether I liked sitting in it, not whether it would photograph well for Architectural Digest. Books on the shelves that I'd actually read, not coffee table volumes about art movements I'd never cared about. A kitchen where I could make coffee without wondering if the marble countertops were worth more than most people's cars. No assistants, no housekeeping staff, no personal trainers or lifestyle consultants, or any of the other people who'd been managing my existence while I was too busy building algorithms to notice that I'd become a stranger in my own life. Just space to think, space to breathe, and space to remember what it felt like to make decisions based on what I actually wanted instead of what would maintain the Henderson family brand. The divorce had been surprisingly clean, legally speaking. When one spouse has been systematically taking credit for the other spouse's intellectual property while planning their exit strategy with a coworker, the distribution of assets tends to be pretty straightforward. Clara got to keep her personal belongings and a modest settlement that would allow her to maintain a comfortable lifestyle as long as she didn't try to recreate her previous spending habits. I got everything else: the company, the patents, the real estate, and most importantly, the satisfaction of knowing that justice had been served with compound interest. But the real victory wasn't financial. The real victory was waking up every morning and not having to wonder what fresh humiliation was waiting for me at the office or what expensive mistake Clara had made that I'd have to quietly fix. The real victory was being able to look in the mirror and see someone who'd finally learned the difference between being successful and being authentically happy. I'd been spending most of my time mentoring young entrepreneurs, people like Lila who had brilliant ideas but needed someone with experience to help them navigate the brutally competitive world of tech startups. It was the kind of work that actually felt meaningful, helping people build something real instead of just accumulating wealth for its own sake. The BrightLayer investment had been paying off beyond my wildest expectations. Lila's team had secured 3 major corporate clients, and their adaptive AI technology was getting the kind of industry attention that Clara had always craved but never actually earned. Better yet, working with them reminded me why I'd fallen in love with technology in the first place. Not for the money or the status, but for the sheer intellectual joy of solving problems that nobody else could solve. I'd also started teaching a graduate seminar at Columbia, sharing what I'd learned about building tech companies with the next generation of engineers and entrepreneurs. The students called me Professor Henderson, which was hilarious considering I'd never actually finished my PhD, but there was something deeply satisfying about passing on knowledge to people who were hungry to learn instead of just looking for shortcuts to success. The doorbell rang, interrupting my morning coffee and my contemplation of how dramatically my life had changed. I wasn't expecting anyone. One of the benefits of living a simpler life was that you didn't have to maintain a social calendar that looked like a Fortune 500 CEO's itinerary. I opened the door to find a FedEx delivery guy holding an envelope with my name written in handwriting I recognized, but hadn't seen in months. Clara's distinctive cursive, the same elegant script that had once written me love notes and anniversary cards back, when we were actually building something together instead of just pretending to be happy for the cameras. "Have a good day, sir," the delivery guy said, apparently oblivious to the fact that he'd just delivered what was probably either an apology letter or a declaration of war from my ex-wife. I took the envelope back to my living room and set it on the coffee table, a simple wooden piece that I'd bought because I liked the grain pattern, not because some interior designer had told me it would photograph well for a lifestyle magazine. For about 10 minutes, I just stared at it, trying to decide if I actually wanted to know what Clara had to say 6 months after her public statement had effectively ended her career in tech. Finally, curiosity got the better of me. I opened the envelope and found a single sheet of paper with a brief handwritten note. "Marcus, I know I have no right to contact you after everything that happened, but I wanted you to know that I've been following the news about BrightLayer and your work at Columbia. I'm genuinely happy that you're building something positive instead of just tearing down what we had together. I left the public spotlight and moved to Portland last month. I'm working for a small nonprofit that helps underserved communities access technology education. It's not glamorous, and the pay is terrible, but it's the first time in years that I've felt like I was actually contributing something meaningful to the world instead of just playing a role. I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking for anything from you. I just wanted you to know that I finally understand the difference between being famous and being worthwhile. You tried to teach me that lesson for years, but I was too busy chasing applause to listen. I hope you're happy. You deserve to be. Clara. P.S. I saw the article about your engagement to that professor from NYU. She seems lovely, and I'm glad you found someone who appreciates who you actually are instead of just what you can provide." I had to read that last part twice before it sank in. Engagement? What engagement? I wasn't engaged to anyone, let alone a professor from NYU. Then I remembered the faculty mixer I'd attended last month, where I'd spent most of the evening talking with Dr. Sarah Chun, a brilliant computer science professor who'd been asking thoughtful questions about my work with adaptive algorithms. Someone had apparently seen us together and jumped to some very creative conclusions. The idea of being engaged to someone I'd met exactly once was absurd, but it also made me realize something important. I was ready for that kind of connection again. Not the performative relationship I'd had with Clara, where everything was filtered through public perception and social media strategy, but something real and authentic with someone who valued substance over style. I folded Clara's letter and put it in my desk drawer, not because I wanted to keep it as some kind of memento, but because it felt like the proper ending to a chapter of my life that had taken way too long to close. She'd finally found her way to something resembling self-awareness, and while it was about 8 years too late to save our marriage, It was oddly comforting to know that she'd eventually figured out the difference between being important and being authentic. The afternoon sun was streaming through my windows, and I had a meeting with a promising startup founder in an hour, followed by dinner with colleagues who actually appreciated my sense of humor instead of just tolerating it. My calendar was full of things I'd chosen to do with people I genuinely liked, not obligations I had to fulfill to maintain some exhausting public persona. I looked around my sunlit apartment, at the books I'd chosen and the furniture I'd picked and the life I'd built for myself after burning down everything that had been suffocating me for years. No assistants, no staged photos, no carefully curated social media presence. Just space to think and work and become whoever I wanted to be without anyone else's approval or applause. For the first time in years, I felt something I'd almost forgotten was possible: complete contentment with my own choices. My worth wasn't tied to Clara's approval anymore, or to her world, or to anyone else's definition of success. I had something much better than revenge or vindication or public recognition. I had control over my own life, my own work, and my own dignity. And honestly, that was worth more than all the penthouse apartments and society parties and magazine covers in Manhattan. The war was over, and I'd won something better than victory. I'd won the freedom to finally be myself.